welcome to our very first episode. And joining me is my good friend, Mike Hylton. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Dan, for having me. Very honored to be here on your first episode of your podcast. This is amazing.
Yeah, this is great. You know, for those that may not know, Mike and I have actually known each other now for 8 years. We started working together at this small little mobile device company called Fixmo. And one of the interesting conversations, which really kind of led us to where we are today, Mike at one point said, look, I really want to be a CEO. What's the best way for me to go? And Mike, for someone in sales, and he'll always be, on the technical side, he was saying, look, do I want to go this technical route? And I want to be a CEO. I'm thinking about joining or starting a new company. How should I do this? And I'm like, well, the fastest way is through sales. And I believe that's probably still the fastest way to the CEO position. But Mike said, oh, I don't want to have a quota. And I'm like, well, if you're the CEO, what do you have the quota for the whole company? And, last year, and Mike and I have taken similar paths because I also want to be a CEO, and I've gone the technical route. Now, if I had gone back and looked at it, knowing what I know today, I would have been, because we see a trend where, CIOs are becoming the CEO. And I still think that's not the norm. People in sales, marketing tend to be put into a CEO position much more quickly. But a year ago, Mike, you completed your MBA from George Mason, right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. It's been a little bit over a year. Seems like yesterday.
Yeah. And as of yesterday, I have been my degree was conferred from the University of Michigan. Go Blue.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So tell me, how do you feel that the MBA journey has assisted you? Has your vision of being a CEO changed? Do you still want to be the CEO of a company at some point? Do you think the MBA has helped you solidify what your plan is?
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, I remember that conversation vividly back 8 years ago. We were sitting in a restaurant, grabbing some pizza after a meeting, and it really dawned on me that technical skills are relevant, but you still can't have those skills in a vacuum. You're operating in a larger picture, and you can't necessarily be a business person who lacks the wherewithal of where technology impacts you. Just think about all the different ways that can impact you with cybersecurity and growth with high scale remote workforce as we see today. And going back to your question about the MBA, I think absolutely it gives you that edge where even just a little extra bit of confidence that says, I belong in this conversation with my peers in marketing, or maybe it's at the finance level, talking about the impact of technology towards business. For example, when it comes to cybersecurity, with our backgrounds, it's so important to be able to convey what is this investment and why is it important? And you have to be able to explain that to C-level very quickly. And you're right, my dream has always been a CEO. I want to be able to lead a company with emerging technology and to know how that investment can really apply and make a difference in the marketplace. And you have to be able to take all the different factors out there, whether it's marketing, sales, finance, as well as the product, which I think is, in this world, SaaS and software is where the margins are. It's so critical to have all that together. So being a technical person, often you're thought of as not having business, or being a business person, you're often thought of not having technology, as you probably know. So I think it's so important to marry those up and sort of create a combination that is formidable when it comes to the environment that we live in today of, high growth and cybersecurity and SaaS.
Yeah, it's interesting because overall, we know every company is either a technology company and they know it, or they're a technology company and they don't yet know it. And one of the things that I found upon my MBA journey is that the majority of the time we always spoke about technology in our terms, and we would say things like, "Oh, we have all this technical debt. This isn't good." And what I learned is that for a company, debt's a good thing. It depends on whether or not the cost of debt is greater than the cost of equity. And so, how am I going to do this? And so, when we hear debt, we're like, well, if my debt's only costing me a point, that's not a big deal because it's cheaper than me spending cash as an example. And so
That's
I was
right.
framing the conversation wrong.
Yeah, when I think of a company who's on a growth trajectory, you don't necessarily want to pay down that debt. You want to essentially maintain that debt level percentage of the revenue as a company and allow it to grow and continue and accelerate. And when I hear of technical debt, it sounds like, you're sort of digging yourself deeper into a hole a lot of times with maybe archaic technology. And it's one of these things where, yeah, you have to be able to explain the differences to the different teams as they come together.
Yeah, the other thing is it allowed me when I started taking a look at why don't companies get rid of their legacy technology fast enough? Because that is where your costs are. Well, when you start taking a look at the present value of technology stacks and you start to see the costs are rising in order to maintain, and you're not able to maintain your future vision, people are like, well, technology is costing us all this money. As an example, when I take a look at like the peer group for the company that I'm in, and on the high end in my peer group, they're spending $15 million a year for their budget, but they're in that same category that I am, and I kind of go, well, why? Well, their technology stack, they're still having to support all of these other systems that are, more than 7 years old in many cases, and the companies don't realize how much that costs because it's never being broken down. They just that when and then when we go to explain, we'll go, well, this is technical debt. Well, no, what it should be is that it's actually driving down, the return on assets, and companies want a higher return on their assets. So we're going, look,
Yeah,
this is driving this down. Instead of saying if we get rid of this and we upgrade, the net present value of this upgrade is going to wind up having an internal rate of return of X. The NPV is X. If both are positive, you should be doing it. And we don't talk in those terms. So, when you're talking to customers, um, how's that conversation go when you start getting to the business people? Because you're having to deal with not only
yeah.
the technical side, but then you have to get into the business people. You have to convince both. So, how do you handle that being a sales executive?
You're absolutely right. And to go into the aspect that you mentioned there about technical debt and sort of pay into it, a good example that you see today is in legacy technologies rather than investing in something like the cloud, where your investment is going to move forward into the future. You see a lot of hospitals who are investing in like Cobalt and things like that to just keep things maintained status quo, where it would probably be better off leveraged into the cloud. But for me, when I'm talking to business executives, I try to frame technology not just in meeting the requirements of what they're talking about, but essentially when it comes to security compliance, talking about as an enabler. Technology and cybersecurity in particular should be a way to enable businesses to achieve their missions. And it should be a way to do things maybe that can restructure a business process and in a way that makes sense, where it's more efficiency, it enables newer ideas and capabilities. Not always about cost savings, but maybe a way to invest in new capabilities that maybe like telemedicine, for example, with a hospital. So rather than just think about the cost savings, while there will be cost savings there in security, but also a way to handle more patients and to easily reach people who may be in rural settings where they can't always go to a hospital. So I think of terms like that because, one, we're here in the quarantine and it's the coronavirus, and I'm kind of thinking about my father-in-law, who is a CFO, CIO combination. He's dual-hatted in a rural hospital that's essentially critical access care. And he's always thinking about these terms. And technology has to sort of serve both, a business need as well as kind of maintaining the investment, if you will, with what you have. And a lot of times we forget the idea of technology is to serve the business rather than sort of itself. It's important to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, and the things that I've been really trying to wrestle with in that in my earlier days in cybersecurity, it's we tried down this path of, well, it's insurance, well, it's risk. And the thing that I always think about is, well, if we don't do X amount of cybersecurity, think of the Target breach. Today, I think, before COVID, they were trading higher than what they did before their breach. And so from a business person, especially with how many companies are being breached today, I'm finding it harder and harder to kind of convince them in some ways as to why we need to spend X amount in cybersecurity, whatever that is. Because I go, what? Because the public's going to forget about it at some point. They're going to say, well, it happens. I mean, every day I get another, communication, it seems like, and I feel like I do a pretty good job of protecting my identity, but my stuff's being compromised all the time through no fault of my own. The companies are being compromised. And how am I, how to frame that conversation back with those same business people? And they'll go, well, what's so-and-so spending? And we take a look at, the percentage of revenue spend to cybersecurity, because really what I've kind of, at least in my mind, is that how I start trying to persuade them is if we're not spending enough money and we're not putting enough resources into this, it's not just insurance. Because, we can have cyber insurance, but I go, they may not cover you because we would be considered not providing enough care, enough resources, and maybe then we're negligent. And now all of a sudden the cyber insurance doesn't pay out, and you then, are, you're screwed at that point as a company. What do you think about that? I mean, how are you addressing this? Because, you work for a cybersecurity company, which has got a great product. How are you addressing those things? I mean, these are just things the way I talk to people is different now.
Yeah. To me, you mentioned Target, and with any large enterprise, cybersecurity has to be taken in with the perspective that it's not a one-time investment, but it's a regular sort of reevaluation and an adjustment to what's the threat. And what we've seen is, for example, with your insurance analogy, you want to definitely insure what you can't provide protection against. But there's also a level of measurement of, are you still doing the basic, necessities? So for your car, for example, you probably go in for an annual safety inspection. You make sure that your car is road, available to and safely driven on the road. And you essentially get a checkbox once a year that you're okay. And then you're able to have a roadworthy car and get insurance for the times where there's just an outlier that you just cannot protect against necessarily of no fault of your own. Or maybe it is a fault of your own, but still, you don't want to be negligent. So from our perspective, it's really a lot of different things that can happen in cybersecurity. And one of the things that we see often is that you can block and prevent all kinds of different safety issues, executables, JavaScript, Python from being transferred from email. But a lot of times we're seeing now the adversaries are starting to leverage well-known file formats, whether it's Word documents, PDFs, and embedding things that are active or malicious inside of those. And the ball is always moving forward. So because you have a one-time investment, that doesn't necessarily preclude you from necessarily having to go through and doing an annual review. One of the things that I've learned a lot from with the intersection of business and cybersecurity is a cybersecurity certification that ties everything into the business world. And it's called SABSA. And about 9 or 10 years ago, I did that. And I was one of the first, I think, 1,000 at the time to achieve that certification. It essentially ties cybersecurity controls to the highest risk and revenue of a business to essentially identify what are your priorities as an organization, what are your crown jewels in terms of the cyber world. And you want to be able to identify those and make sure those are well protected and go through different risk scenarios. So it's a framework to tie revenue to cybersecurity. And I highly recommend that for anyone who is interested in maybe at least getting a start, not necessarily an MBA and a cybersecurity background, 25 plus years, but or a PhD in your case. But it's a good way to identify those areas and how they merge together.
Yeah, SAPS is a great overall framework, and for those of you who don't know a lot about its history, that was one of the first things that Mike and I came together on when we worked together at Fixmo, because I have an enterprise architecture background, and in the federal government, the Clinger-Cohen Act is what essentially provided the CIO of federal agencies with a direction for how they needed to marry up the technology projects with budget. And a part of enterprise architecture, which is all based on, in this case, for a lot of the federal government, is based on the Zachman framework, and then that trickles down, and eventually we started coming up with enterprise security architecture, and SABSA was one of the first to be able to take the cybersecurity principles, put that into Zachman, and then we start seeing that inside your OMB 300s and 53s. But it really takes me back to those days when I was doing that with the Department of Energy, which was a lot of fun, because you do get to see the spend. And when cybersecurity, you can look at it from the criminal perspective, which is follow the money. But as the protector, you also, if you follow the money, you know what needs to be protected. Bad actors and us people fighting that fight, we're both using the exact same techniques. But the difference is the bad actor doesn't have the CEO to go report to. He doesn't need their permission. We have to get permission, and sometimes that's a difficult discussion with the board and with the rest of the executive team, because they just don't understand. Like here, a great example is, while we're doing all this stuff with COVID, my chief strategy officer wanted to start using Zoom for a lot of ways in which we're going to communicate with our members. Now, if that conversation happened a week prior, I'd have been like, yes, let's go, Zoom. I love Zoom. I think Zoom's a great product. But then we find out just, a week later, they're not encrypting any of their credentials. The encryption keys itself are being stored in Hong Kong, and people go, well, it's Hong Kong, not China. Well, pay attention to world events, because China's basically annexing, Hong Kong at this point, bringing them into the fold for, whether you like it or not. That's what's happening. And, well, your encryption keys are there. Now all of a sudden your personal identifiable information is potentially exposed. There are reports of how they're sharing data with Facebook, even if you tell it not to share data. So some pretty surprising things. And from a risk factor, I'm like, ooh, risk is too high. But the business person doesn't understand. The business person is going, well, this company is doing it. Why can't we? And I find myself as a parent going that same thing. Well, if that company told you to jump off a bridge, would you? I mean, that's the thing that we always heard growing up. Well, just because Johnny or Sally are doing this doesn't mean that you should. But I'd say they've already made the decision with Zoom. They've been using Zoom for years. They're just not going to rip it out and put it in a new product. But we don't have anything today, so I'm making my risk-based decision based on the information I know today. And that is difficult for our other business leaders to understand, because they don't understand the difference. Yeah, I don't know how often you have those kind of things because I mean, some of the stuff with your product, people will be like, well, I already have McAfee. Um,
You
why does that
know,
matter?
we hear that all the time, and it's really, there's no such thing as herd immunity when it comes to cybersecurity, and you can't really just follow your peers. And it's fascinating to me how often I hear about, well, we have McAfee on the server, so we're good. But what about all those files you have transferring between your perimeter from the outside? Maybe, for example, Wolf Creek Nuclear Power Plant, 2.5, 3 years ago, purportedly was hacked, according to the Wall Street Journal, by Russian hackers. And what they did is they uploaded fake resumes to the HR portal and
Much like
PDF
everyone else in
Word
cybersecurity
documents.
does.
Yeah, I mean everyone, you just upload a file and someone's going to open it, and you know what happened? They were able to get the admin permissions of that local business network. Now it never went across to the SCADA side of things, but that kind of shows you like you just can't have it like on a server and think that you're protecting everything. Data is always in transit. You want to like prevent it at the earliest part of the perimeter that you possibly can. So shifting over to what we like to call the left earlier on to the process at the beginning. But I want to go back to something you mentioned, Dan. I mean, you brought up this excellent point about Zoom and the security of it. And, I was reviewing security for Zoom myself and being part of the federal market. We have this big thing, FedRAMP, and that's sort of like, hey, if you're FedRAMP, you're pretty much good to go. What are your thoughts around, the security concerns of Zoom? But at the same time, there are, FedRAMP approved. Are you just going to follow sort of like the checkbox of like, the rest of the companies out there it's saying, well, we use it because it's FedRAMP and it's compliant and, it's sort of have like the check boxes there. But in the day, it sounds like there's a serious security concern there, the encryption keys.
Uh, it is something I hear all the time. And how I respond typically when people ask about, well, this is compliant with, FIPS, FedRAMP, you name, it's got common criteria. And I always go, those were point in time evaluations. But I say, you know what, Target, Equifax, Home Depot, name the particular breach all had in common. They were all compliant. They all had their PCI DSS certifications. They're under audits constantly. They were all found to be fine because at those point in time audits, they probably were. I would like to believe at least they were. But even still, I think a lot of folks don't recall the process of an audit. And one, it's a point in time, and it's not constantly going on. I come in there, maybe for a week. I've never seen a company in terms of does an audit that's there for 30 days. 30 days gives you more likelihood you're going to catch something. A week, you're only going to see the most obvious of things. But this is why companies also need to take it upon themselves. And this is where I believe the continuous monitoring isn't really happening. There's companies that say they do it, but if they were continuously monitoring, are they identifying? Do they have a risk register? Are they putting things back into the risk register? Are they following up with their end users? Are they eventually saying this system needs to come offline? I think no. Because I go, how is a bank compliant when they're still running Windows XP on their ATMs? How are they compliant today if they're running Windows 7 and they didn't purchase the 1 year, I can't remember what Microsoft calls it, but basically it's a support license for an additional year. How are they compliant? Windows 7 is a broken kernel. So you're literally, the Titanic is sinking and you're trying to get the water out of the boat, but the boat's still going to go down. That's Windows 7. It's the Titanic. It's hit the iceberg. Don't have
So
any buckets of water.
it begs the question then. So let's say you have a legacy system. It has a potential to be hacked. It hasn't been patched in years, but in order to transition, you would essentially have to, have a denial of service on yourself by removing it out of service. Where's that cost benefit, break even, if you will, about do I take this out of service or do I allow the risk to sort of continue? And your example there about ATMs, do you take down, a percentage of those ATMs, which essentially you could have two things that could happen. You could have a denial of service from the outside, or you could actually have worse, breach of data. And, how are those decisions made and how should they be made?
And the ATM one to me is an interesting conversation because depending on where you're located, I'm going, one, who's getting cash today? Like, it's especially today with COVID-19 going around, cash is dirty. It's already dirty. And now the potential of, if you had COVID, it's transferring to that money. And that's why a lot of institutions that are available today, they're like, look, we're not accepting cash. It's card or go home. So there's no cash. So all the fee income from ATMs, it's got to be going down. I can't imagine today that fee income is very high. And I don't think it's very high per ATM anyway. Even if you're in the middle of DC or Manhattan and everything was normal, how much cash are they really getting out today? And what's that fee income look like? So if I took that ATM out of service if I'm just upgrading this thing to Windows 10, you really only have two major players in the market today, NCR and Diebold, or Diebold, however you pronounce it. They're always behind. I'm like, this is your main core business, and how come you're not ready for Windows 10? It's not like Windows 10 just came out. I think Windows 10's been in the market now for 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
And we're just now talking about going to Windows 10? What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. And, not to mention there's some of the same manufacturers for, voting machines and things like that. So a lot of potential there.
Yeah. So, speaking of voting machines, they're typically, a closed network, not really connected to anything. But do you see the kind of products that you all are out there selling? For the, OpSWAT's got a pretty decent product. Are you seeing any traction with, the elections are getting ready to come up again. We're going to be talking about Russian hacking the elections.
We actually do see a lot of traction there. We had a couple states acquire our products for endpoint continuous monitoring diagnostics. And I don't want to name them, but they are, we are deployed protecting a lot of the election security today. And I do think it's just going to accelerate as we just get our name out there more and more. And, for anyone who's interested, the company is called OpSWAT. It's short for Operational SWAT Team, which is we're essentially the cybersecurity for, the highest security out there, critical infrastructure, things like that, nuclear power plants, voting, banking, all that. That's what we focus on. We're not your standard, Dr. Norton. We are for critical networks, are usually air gapped or they have some type of presence with a larger network. We want to make sure absolutely certain to the best we can that we reduce any and all risk by either through detection or through prevention. And the detection is about aggregating anti-malware engines from around the world. We know that antivirus is not going to be the end all be all, but a lot of times that's your basic cyber hygiene. And if you're going to do it, you should probably have as much as you possibly can. And in our research, Dan, it was actually very fascinating. We took 34 engines and we determined that the number one engine 1 week could actually be a standard deviation about 2.5 weeks. So for example, the next week, they will not be the first one to detect a new piece of malware. It could actually be the last. And it depends on a lot of things like the origin of that malware geographically in the world. If it's a holiday here in the United States, one of our top tier engines that we've seen may not pick up, as quickly as it was. So, and the long realm of things, or the long view, is that your window of outbreak could be a difference with using one engine, could be essentially multiple weeks, a month. And if you have up to 34, it could be even maybe up 15 minutes. So whilst any malware, any virus, with machine learning, AI may not be the end all be all. You still have to do it. It makes sense a lot of times to catch what you can catch easily. But when it comes to prevention of that 0-day advanced targeted attacks, you really want to do your best to make sure you're not getting anything embedded inside of a document or a PDF that shouldn't be there. How often do you need JavaScript in a PDF for resumes or Java? I didn't even know you could actually embed full Java applets and PDFs, but you can. And with all the security concerns, there's all kinds of things you can do once the weakness is exploited for a PDF. So when it comes to things like election security, that really, resonates with me a lot, because in democracy, there's really nothing more critical than that, and it's definitely deemed critical infrastructure from DHS for a reason.
I absolutely agree. I think one of the questions that I just think about as you were talking this is, didn't know that we could put Java or JavaScript inside of Microsoft Word, and I come to my question is, why does Microsoft even feel like that's a good idea?
Yeah.
I mean, to allow a document creation and editing tool, why do I need to execute scripts inside of that?
Yeah, well, here's the thing: is not a lot of people recognize that the .docx extension is actually a container. What I mean by a container is that just like a zip file, it's an archive where it has multiple files inside of it. Just like an APK, remember with the Android file system, you actually have multiple files inside of it, and you can easily go to like a command prompt and just pipe in data or different files into it, embed it. And also, not only can you do active content like Java, but steganography, adding in files, infiltrating or exfiltrating data back and forth of network. And one of the things that we do is we make sure that that file is cleansed, whether it's going in or out, and make sure only the file that's important that you would recognize in the Word document, if we don't recognize it, is pulled out. And it's still a Word document. It's still in its native file format. We do this for about 85 file formats, whether it's full motion video, CAD drawings. You probably work with people that are contractors all the time, and you have to transfer data. You can't say, I can't accept a file from you, or I will accept these files for you without trusting or full trust. Our whole motto is a zero trust mentality. We're going to assume that file is bad, and we're just going to take it apart, rebuild it, and make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be there on the fly.
I think that's a good point, and this is where companies again have that a different, I will say, take on a lot of this. They want to trust all of their partners. They're willing to share data with anyone and everyone, because in some cases it generates revenue for them. Or gives them more insight into their customers or their members. And so if they're doing this, then they get better insight. But how do you know that the data is clean? And I always go, don't trust anyone, because and it's don't trust anyone all the time when it comes to any type of file transfers, because we can't think about this as being that they were just compliant, that they just got their compliance certification, because that was a point in time. You have to always assume it's not trustworthy until you have gone through your own vetting process, and it's every single time. And when people ask me, like, why did I want to, why am I not just being like on the pen testing side, red team, blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, not that I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I absolutely believe that the situation's always winnable. There is no Kobayashi Maru where it's an unwinnable situation unless you cheated like Captain Kirk did. I believe it is winnable, but the problem is if I'm wrong once, maybe I'm out of a job. When you're on that offensive side or you're the hacker, you just got to be right one time out of a billion and you're famous forever. Even if your claim to fame is just, social engineering, like Kevin Mitnick.
Exactly. And, a lot of hacking, it really is social engineering. And a lot of times it's about one of our end users, right? Clicking on the email, clicking on a link they shouldn't have. And while I understand, that's a major issue that needs to be overcome, why is a network that has so much money involved in it so sensitive to being brought down to its knees essentially by one person accidentally one time clicking on a link? And we think that shouldn't be the case. And we do have a product that focuses around that. But I want to kind of ask you a question more about one of the recent events that we saw with LabCorp. I think it was April 23rd, around that time. They're facing multiple lawsuits from their suppliers, essentially getting breached. That they do business with, medical billing, I think it was, and there was a data breach. And we're seeing they're responsible for this. And what are your thoughts about that when you're working with partners? Maybe it's down chain, maybe it's horizontal. I know, what's the due diligence and cybersecurity approach there? Because obviously that could have impact in you in terms of lawsuits. But what about like M&A activity? If your partners, you have no idea if they're protected, and you're exchanging files all the time, essentially working on your behalf as a billing company. In that example, LabCorp, there's a lot of potential there. So what are your thoughts on how to really make sure at what level are you going to enforce compliance to cybersecurity, and how is that done without really breaking that relationship?
I think that it's certainly not an easy answer, but if it were easy, then we would already have a solution. This comes back again into a zero trust model. They are a partner, but I have to take responsibility for my piece and accountability into that. Okay, LabCorp was breached and I'm a partner of theirs, and somehow I get breached because they were breached. Well, what was I doing in order to prevent it as well? Why did I not take the proper precautions? Just because they're a partner doesn't mean I should be trusting them all the time. I'm trusting them from a business relationship, not from their cyber hygiene. We tend to, with critical vendors, only look at their controls, their SOC 2 Type 2s, whether or not they've gone through their annual, FISMA compliance. It's an annual. That's all we do. We forget about it until that period of time comes up or there's a problem, because we don't implement a zero trust model all the time. We do it at a point in time. Oh, well, they were fine. And we don't continue that process. So I go back and, yeah, it's easy. Okay, a company's going to sue you. You could sue anyone for anything in this country, and there's really no recourse. It's just legal action. What's the motive? I think in some cases the motive is, I don't want my customers to believe I was doing anything wrong, so I'm going to shift the blame from me not doing what I was supposed to do over to the bigger company. I don't know if LabCorp was the bigger in this scenario or not. I didn't take a look at their in terms of the different people that were affected in terms of their balance sheet. I have no idea. But let's assume LabCorp's the bigger fish. I'm going to push the blame. I don't want my customers thinking I'm at fault. LabCorp, they didn't do their right thing. Well, in cybersecurity, it's about working together. Even though there is no herd immunity, if I'm not in constant communication with my counterparts and the partners over there, then I'm not going to know. But then there's another aspect from a legality. I don't want to tell you a problem that I'm having, because then you're not going to trust me. Well, we all know that every company has a problem. And this is why I like some of the different independent groups that are out there that are constantly sharing data with one another. I can't remember the one that we use in the banking side here now off the top of my head, but we pay for a membership, and there's an email list, and people are like, hey, what does anyone know about this company? Hey guys, I'm happen to seeing an uptick in denial of service attacks on our NCRDI platform, which is, they also provide a mobile banking solution. We're seeing a bunch of credential stuffing. Are you all seeing it? Like that, there's a partnership, even though we're also in a competitive market. And many times it could be the credit union that's right next to me. But it doesn't matter because when it comes to cybersecurity, we're all thinking we're in this together, even though the business side is competing. So let the business side compete. Us technology people don't need to compete with one another. We need to establish those partnerships. We don't have to give away our intellectual property. What we want to make sure of is that, hey, I'm seeing this. What kind of suggestions do you have? Collaborate. We don't tend to
Yeah.
collaborate very well on the technology side many times.
You have to really wonder how often that conversation is happening between maybe a company who has suppliers and its downstream, vendors and partners. Are they really having that cybersecurity conversation on a regular basis? And one thing that I thought was very fascinating in my MBA program, which has a focus on national security, when you look at like a sort of a non-competitive or maybe a highly integrated market, such as federal government and like aerospace and defense, they essentially have one customer, U.S. federal government. It's over 90% of revenues for many of the big aerospace companies. And they are very well integrated and getting even more integrated with just sharing, collaborating security requirements, the whole defense industrial base, and just having some of those requirements that we're seeing set forth with policies where they have to follow a lot of the same exact ones in federal. You almost have to wonder if you have a supplier, let's say LabCorp or maybe another company where they have subsidiaries or even free market participants as a partner, if they have a certain percentage of revenue, of the larger company, it shouldn't be used as a firewall to not talk, in terms of security, but it should be, an enforcement where it says, look, you're going to have regular reoccurring cyber risk management meetings to be on the same page. And I think that maybe is a good example of the defense industrial base and collaboration of their, biggest customer, federal government. Maybe we'll start to see that happen more. What do you think?
I would like to believe it'll happen more. I'd like to. I really would. I just don't. I don't see it happening. Not anytime soon. Maybe at some point.
Yeah, not
People got to check their
necessarily an
egos at the
integrated
door.
stock. Yeah, I don't necessarily see an integrated stock, but maybe like a monthly, working group or something. Yeah.
It would be nice. That's just why I try to collaborate. As much as I possibly can. I mean, that was probably one of the biggest things. Switching gears back to the MBA aspect, and one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to do my own podcast show here. I took 22 months, and I no longer. I didn't take that up. During that 22 months, I had to remove a lot of things that I enjoyed, and part of that was really having a focused thinking. And so I wanted to kind of combine my focused thinking and increasing my social capital with people that I've had relationships with. And I no longer live in the DC area. You and I were talking the other day, and you're like, yeah, I really thought you were going to come back to DC. And I had zero desire to be back in DC. But I had a lot of relationships I had built. I had a very strong network of people that I invested time in. So I wanted to maintain and then also take stuff that I've been thinking about and put it out there and kind of chronicle it. That's part of the contribution. I'm going to take the learnings from my MBA and bring it out to the world. Maybe someone can grab some type of use for it. So this is just part of what I'm doing next. Now that you've completed your MBA, you've had a year. What's next for Mike Hylton?
I'm actually, that's a very good question, and it's one of the things I've been thinking about. And as you and I have talked before about this, sales is something that is a very necessary skill for everyone. Everyone should be in sales when it comes to business ownership. You have to be able to sell your company. I wanted to really hone my skills in presenting and be able to deliver, pitches when it comes to investment. whether it's start a company or maybe, collaborate with someone to start a company, but I really want to get to the point where I can perfect my pitch to get seed or, investment around money. Now, I don't know if that's going to be, tomorrow or 5 years or 10 years, but my goal is to start a company. And it's really about finding the right people within my network and who share some of the same ideas I have around cybersecurity, and maybe finding something very small, do it very well for a very targeted market, and build off of that. And there's a lot of ideas out there that I think are could be better executed and perfected. And one of these days, I'd like to sort of get in front of the investment community, pitch those ideas, and drive it forth. I'm very passionate about technology and business, and I want to be able to really make a contribution back to everyone I've worked with, as well as the community that really needs better cybersecurity products. There's a lot of what I think snake oil out there that has a lot of hype and it just doesn't work. And I think this is going to be the decade where I think we're going to get an edge on, on threats, on the cyber actors out there who are bad actors. And right now, the market is very immature. There's a lot of different players, a lot of misinformation, disinformation. I think a lot of that is going to consolidate this decade, but there's still going to be room for companies who really can make a difference. And I hope to be part of that when it comes to next generation cybersecurity tools and products.
Nice. So have you ever thought about maybe with the next step of maybe going to work for like a private equity company, where you're now looking at how to acquire them and then package them back up and then resell?
Funny you mentioned that. My last boss suggested something very similar, and I like to look into that. I think that would be very fascinating. I think I would learn a lot, which I'm motivated through learning and applying what I know from the business side as well as the technology side to finding good investments. And then I think that would help me in my path as well of what do investors look for. So I would be very motivated to, find out more about that, that's for sure.
I think it would be
And
interesting.
what about you? So your MBA just completed. You probably completed like a lot of self-assessments, leadership classes, thought about your path forward. You put a lot of time and investment into this. Podcast as part of it. What do you hope to accomplish with the podcast, your future and your career? What's next for Dan Ford?
World domination.
Of course.
Part of that's this. I mean, my path is, and I've made it very well known even to my current boss. I mean, it's part of the reason why I joined the company that I did was that, I am going to be a CEO, and my goal is to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I believe that I have the right mentality. I believe I have the right leadership skills. I believe that I have the right eye for talent and seeing how to get people to be the best version of themselves. And that was one of the reasons why I did my MBA, was to figure out all the different pieces that were missing to do that. I didn't have enough of the business skills, and sure, you could absolutely acquire business skills through self-learning, but I also wanted to acquire a network of people, and people would say, well, you could get that on your own. I'm like, yeah, but well, when I take a look at it now, my customer acquisition cost, if I were to try to acquire it on my own, would cost me more money than it did for my MBA because of the amount of time and energy to get put in there. An MBA gave me a framework, and it gave me other people that were also looking to make other people to include in their own network. So now I have a network of people, of 122 people that I graduated with. I have one of the largest in the country alumni network. So I bought into that. So that's going to be a part of how I get to that CEO, is to help, or is to use my network. My boss has committed to getting me there. It won't be at my current company, but that's because he's still a relatively young person, so he's got 15 years before he would retire, and I'm not waiting 15 years. I may wait. I need to build that path over the next 5 to 7 years, most likely, if not sooner. Um, Continuing to put out my own thoughts. Like I plan on at some point in the near future writing a book on technology and support organizations, because a support organization is inherently a negative uh, model, meaning that anyone only wants to talk to you because they have something negative going on, either negative to say or because they just need a problem. They don't talk to you when things are good.
Like, I can't log into my email. Help me now. It's urgent. It's
Right.
your fault. Yeah.
So, and that, if they say that you need to have three positive things every day to counteract one negative for an average organization, and I want to be a great organization, how do I get that to 10 to 1, especially in a negative model? Because people only talk to us when there's a problem. And it's like that with call centers. It's in any support organization, not just IT. So people will hopefully grab something from what I would be putting out there. So I plan on writing a book. I plan on getting back involved in the other things that I enjoyed. You know, home brewing. I mean, that's one of the things that I helped get you into. It was home brewing.
Yes.
It's
Thank
a
you.
lot of fun, uh, and you
The
get a much higher
experimentation.
quality product. Right.
Yeah.
Get back into home brewing. I'm very big into whiskey. At some point, I want to have my own whiskey brand. I want to, I want to be involved in a lot of different things, but most importantly, it's how do I give back to the community? Because I didn't get here by myself.
Right.
Um, I would say that I wasn't lucky. I just I just came across opportunities and I didn't say no. And failure was just not an option. So I want to teach people that. I mean, it's a big reason. I mean, I love having interns. I'll get back into teaching, all of those things. But now I can teach in a subject that's also just not technology.
Yeah.
I'd like to figure out a way to bridge and maybe even convince some of these universities to have a class that bridges business and technology,
That's
and
right.
vice
It's
versa.
so needed.
Yeah.
It's so needed. I would totally read your book. And as I'm kind of thinking about what you're saying about the internships, not getting here on your own, I'm just sort of reminiscing about my own past, and failure was never an option. So I started as an intern at the Pentagon. I think it's about 16 and a half, 17. And the whole reason why I even started, I took a few computer classes in high school, and I was, just like any other teenager, very, much of a smart ass. And I would basically tell the teacher, like, that's not exactly right. And at one point, he was like, would you like to teach the class? I said, as a matter of fact, I would. And I taught the class, and then went very well, actually, the rest of the class. And a few days later, one of the administrators called me into the office, and I thought I was in a lot of trouble. Turns out they found an opening, or they had an opening for someone like me to help out with cybersecurity at the Pentagon. So got my start there. They told me it was only going to be for the summer, and that at max it would only last for the summer. In fact, I had a part-time job at the grocery store stocking the shelves. I loved it, and I suggested to my dad that there's an opportunity that I could leave, and he's like, "Well, that's only for 3 months. You have a guaranteed job at the grocery store. You're going to need the money when you graduate. You probably should stay at the grocery store." I ended up taking that chance, and that in the 3 months, they said, "You have surpassed not only all the college interns here, but a lot of our full-time employees. We would love to keep you on board no matter what we can do. Even if it was like 1 hour per week, 1 hour per day, however it fits into your schedule, we would like to keep you on board. I was there for 7 years, and failure was never, ever an option. I paid my way through college, through my master's program, and just reminiscing just on the MBA program for a little bit. I thought it was fascinating. When I first went in, we did a assessment about each person. Everyone came out as being competitive. And I thought that's interesting because I really think I am very competitive. And then the end of the term, we did another assessment that's more thorough. And my score in terms of just how competitive I was is extremely high. And what I've learned from there is that you have to sort of balance like how people may perceive you. And that's one of the things I take away from my MBA program is that when I'm working in teams, because we're all working in teams, how will others perceive me? And I want to be more supportive to the overall project, even if I don't see someone as seen as their priority. The next project I work with them, they will probably see as a priority and I won't see it. So I always try to keep things in perspective. I don't know if you've ever seen that in your MBA program, working with the different peer groups and teams. Sometimes someone's not pulling their weight. Sometimes you're pulling the weight more than you should be. It's one of these things that I take away from my MBA program that I think is going to last, through my entire career, is just helping and understanding where people can contribute. And sometimes it's more and maybe it's less in sometimes in areas than as being as consistent or as sense of urgency that I always have. So it's something I always keep in the back of my mind to have an understanding with certain people, because MBA people have a tendency to be, typecast as a type A sort of jerk. And it's one of these things that I do try to recognize. So thank you for the time today to, reminisce together on that. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Dan.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it. And I think the most important point for those people that should understand is if you're not willing to bet on yourself, why will anyone else? And I think that's the great thing of what you did at the Pentagon and getting that internship and moving there for that 3 months was that you bet on yourself. And if you do that and you believe in yourself, you will find a way. So, Mike, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being my first guest. I hope you'll come back often, because I'm sure we got plenty of things to talk about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan.